Morning, everybody. About 10 years ago, two British actors who also love to ride motorbikes had an idea to go on an extended road trip. One of these actors, Ewan McGregor, was very busy at the time. He was an actor who played a leading character in the Star Wars, the modern, more recent Star Wars movies. And so they wanted to take a break, and they went on this, they planned this road trip, and it sort of mushroomed, like some of our plans do at times. You know, we have a great idea, and then it's no longer just a trip down to the corner shop. The next thing we find ourselves somewhere in Key West. So the same was with these actors. They decided to do a little road trip, and then they thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if we rode a little longer? What about riding from London to New York? But do it, not going west, but going east. So they looked at the map, and there was this, and it was true, there was this big piece of land, because between London and New York, there's usually, if you look at it going west, there's just lots of water, and bikes and water don't mix, trust me. But when you look east, when you look at the world map, and you look London to New York, and there's a lot of land that you can ride on if you go east from England. And so that's what they did, and 3 years later they had the same idea to continue that, and instead of riding the long way round, they rode the long way down from the top of Scotland, from John O'Groats, all the way down to Cape Town, the southern tip of South Africa, and so they rode through Europe and the African continent. Very good, very interesting. It's on Netflix. But be warned, they don't bleep out the stuff when these guys get angry. So, but I like riding motorbikes. Well, I used to before I came to the US and saw a lot of craziness on the road. So there you go. You guys are good back there. There you go. That's a long way down, a long way round when they rode from London to New York, through Europe, through the Asian continent. There are a couple of Kazakhstan and the Ukraine and Russia and Mongolia, and then back into Russia, and then into Siberia, and then across to, they took a plane to Alaska, and then from Alaska was kind of smooth, down into Canada, and then the US, and finally New York. Why am I saying this? Well, there were two interesting aspects with these road trips. Not everything went well on these road trips, and that's why I'm saying, if you're interested in this and you go and find this on Netflix, be warned, right? I'm just telling you now. So you don't say, well, Pastor told we can watch it, and then you get all, when these guys start talking. Because not everything went well and went right. They got stuck in deep sand, and they fell over, I don't know, a million times. And there's two aspects that I took from this. One was that when they hit their rock bottom, and they had it in both trips, on this, the long way round, when they were in Mongolia or somewhere, and it was just sand, and there were no roads, and it was just frustrating. I remember this particular episode. It was day after day, it was just, you didn't make a lot of progress, and it was just frustrating. They reminded themselves of that this is where they were right now, was not the final destination of their trip, that they were heading somewhere. They were part of this trip from London all the way to New York, the long way round. So when they got stuck in deep sand in Mongolia, they had to remind themselves that this is not the end of the trip. We were going somewhere. So keep that in mind. That's point number one. Point number two. Gosh, this goes really quickly. No, we're gonna preach this properly. Point number two was, there was another element in there that was a little more subtle. And there was more in the second trip when they drove from Scotland down to South Africa. Because on that trip, particularly, they had to keep a schedule. There was a particular ferry that they had to catch from Egypt to the Sudan that ran only once a week. And so they had to rush through Europe and through northern Africa to get to this ferry on time. And I remember Hugh McGregor complaining about this when they were in Cairo, in Egypt, complaining about, we're rushing through all these sceneries, we're rushing through all these cities, we're not meeting any of the people. This is what the road trip was actually about, to meet people, to see sights, to just ride your bike and not to be dictated to by a particular schedule. So while they had the destination in mind when they got stuck in deep sand, on the flip side, and then later on, once they caught the ferry, and they did catch it, and then they rode through, you see that they slow down the pace. And they do take their time, and they want to meet the people, and they want to see the sights. So when they ride through Kenya and through Tanzania and Uganda, and then over into Botswana and down to, I'm probably missing a few countries there, but they end up in Namibia and then in South Africa. While they were on the road that was heading somewhere, they also wanted to enjoy the moment of the trip. So the journey both had a destination and was a destination. Are you with me? Let me say that again. The journey both had a destination and at the same time was the destination. Why am I saying all this? Well, and why is it called the big picture this morning? About, what is today, 15th of March? About 3 weeks ago, I came across a link. And I did this disclaimer in Maholi when I preached this last week. There's the ministry called Amazing Facts, and most of you know that, or many of you know that, with Doug Batchelor in Central California, Sacramento. And while Pastor Batchelor and I, we don't know each other, right? So please, don't think that him and I were really close and, you know, we go out every time I'm in California and every time he's in New Jersey, you know, we go over to Philly to have a cheese. No, it's not like that. He don't know me. But I know him, of course, because he's a very popular figure in our church, Adventist church. And so I don't know how, but I get newsletters from him. I guess I signed up at some stage somewhere. I need to say this because there are some things that Pastor Batchelor and I, we don't see eye to eye on. And I need to mention that so that you don't think that when I use him now as an illustration and as a reference point that I agree with everything that Pastor Batchelor teaches. I disagree with him on on women in ministry. I'm a very strong supporter of ordained women pastors. Well, they're not ordained right now, but that's for a different sermon. That's for a different time. Don't worry about that. Right? We can discuss this another time. But I don't agree with how he approaches this discussion, because of course he's against it. I don't agree with his stand on pastors wearing wedding rings, as you can see. I don't agree with his stand on that. And I'm a very strong supporter of all sorts of instruments in the church that we're trying to get back, right? There's a lot of space here. There's a lot of space there for we have the electronic drums, but there's a bass guitar missing and stuff like that. So we don't always see eye to eye, but that's fine. And here's why. Here's why. Pastor Doug and I, we belong to the same church. He is a pastor and so am I. Pastor Doug and I, we can sit and have communion, wash each other's feet, although theologically we disagree on some what I consider fringe issues. Because we belong to the same church. And this is another sermon all in itself, that you and I can be in this very same church and still disagree on certain things with each other. Aha. Oh, yes. That doesn't make you less an Adventist, and that doesn't make me less an Adventist pastor. Because there is latitude in the body of Christ. Yes. I know some of you don't believe what I'm just saying. You think that we all should agree with you who don't like women pastors. Not so, because the same way I don't say that you all should adopt my view on that it's okay. But that's for a different sermon. And we can go over the text that you have in your head right now. But Pastor, doesn't Paul say in 1 Timothy, I know the texts, and we can discuss that at some other stage. All I'm making is the point that we can live in this church and still have a diversity of opinion. And so I, who is a strong supporter on these certain issues, who Pastor Doug would not support whatsoever, I can still use this man and his ministry as a reference point in my sermon. Because I'm that good. No. Anyway, long story. Bring it to a point, Schnüll. Come on, man, wrap it up. So Pastor Doug, on his website and his newsletter, he referenced a video, a YouTube video, where some unknown priest who I had never heard of before, and the name is up there in my notes, but it's up there, was invited to address a Pentecostal leadership convention in February of this year in Texas, which was, I don't know if you've heard of the name Kenneth Copeland. He's a very famous Pentecostal minister with a ministry, Kenneth Copeland Ministries. And Kenneth Copeland Ministries have a ministers' leadership convention once a year in Texas. And this year, in February, they met again. And this particular priest, he's an Anglican, fringe Anglican. It's a bit interesting to read up on that, but anyway. He came and addressed this convention. He addressed this convention and he brought greetings. So he gave this long spiel, and then he played a video that he had recorded on his phone a couple of weeks earlier when he went to visit somebody else who he's close with. See, this particular priest used to work with a particular bishop, cardinal, Catholic cardinal in Argentina, who then was elected Pope and is now Pope Francis. And so this particular priest, on his phone, recorded a video greeting that the Pope gave in the Vatican, and he brought this to this Pentecostal convention in Texas. Gave a glowing introduction and then played the tape. It's about 7 minutes long. And then Pastor Copeland takes the mic and he says, wow, you know, basically they pray for the Pope, and the video clip is about 45 minutes altogether. If you go to amazingfacts.org sometime this afternoon and watch it yourself. Remember, right? I don't agree with everything that he says, but this one was really good. And at the end of the clip, Pastor Copeland says, when he started out in ministry 47 years ago, this would have been impossible. And I agree. That the head of the Roman Catholic Church would agree to send a video greeting to a Pentecostal pastoral or leadership convention, when I grew up, was unheard of and inconceivable. That then the convention would agree to not only play this thing, but embrace it and welcome it and send video greetings. And they did. They sent video greetings back to the Vatican and exchanged invitations and so forth. Yes, he's right. 47 years ago, that would have been inconceivable. Why am I getting so excited about this? Well, because I grew up in Germany, as some of you may have noticed in the last 2 sermons I preached here. And there you go. And there's Pastor Doug, and they look the same, innit? Take away the beard and the glass. Anyway, I'm digressing. Maybe it's the haircut or lack of it. I grew up in Germany, in North Germany. North Germany is traditionally Protestant. So I come from a strong Lutheran background. Now Luther, as some of you may remember, in the 16th century, was a reformer. He was a Catholic monk who saw a lot of bad things happen in the church that he loved, and he wanted to reform the church, but the church wouldn't want him to reform, so they kicked him out. And so then Luther started his, well, basically it mushroomed grew into a separate church, and we have the Protestants protesting against what they saw going on wrong in the Catholic Church, protesting, and that's my background. So I'm a Protestant. I carried that into my church too. Yeah. Let's not go down that road, Schnüll, because you still want to keep your job here. So anyway, And so for me, there existed this divide, right, between the Roman Catholic Church on that side and us Protestants and Lutherans and evangelicals, and then eventually out of this tradition came we, the Adventists. We're here. And there's this gap. And the old church, what they call themselves, the mother church, the Roman Catholic Church, is over there. And there's this gap. And never shall the twain meet, right? That's how I grew up. But then 20 years ago or so, there was a beginning of trying to say, well, you know, does this gap really have to be here? Let's see if we can find ways and find points of commonality and of consent. And so there were movements to bridge the gap. I remember, I don't know when, forgive me, I'm talking off the top of my head here, so I don't have the reference on me, but there was a declaration made in Germany of a common, a statement of common faith or whatever, of agreeing on a certain definition of being saved that both the Roman Catholic Church and the German Lutheran Church agreed on. And that was a big thing back then. That these two sides who had been so apart now could agree on this. Why am I even mentioning this? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because there is something about our Roman Catholic friends that sits very uneasy in the Adventist mind. And it's the following. And that's why I call this the big picture. We have to keep in mind the big picture. And I cannot, as an Adventist pastor, push under the carpet events like this video greeting that happened the other day. In fact, before I go there, before I put you in the big picture, let me just go to the USA Today, who wrote a day ago in their politics section that the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, Republican Ohio, extended a formal and open invitation on Thursday to Pope Francis to address a joint meeting of Congress. I'm reading from the USA Today. If the pontiff accepts, so this is an open invitation that hasn't been replied to yet. If he accepts, it would be unprecedented. No pope or religious leader that serves as a head of state, because you know that Vatican is both a church, is a church state. So he's both the head of the church, the Roman Catholic Church, and he's the head of a state, which is the Vatican, which is a state. No pope or religious leader that serves as a head of state has ever addressed Congress. Don't need to read any more than that. Why am I mentioning this to us here, good Seventh-day Adventist Church in Cherry Hill? Why am I mentioning this? Well, again, let me say one more thing here. And I used to do this 25 years ago, so I've become very cautious when people see stuff like this and then go into eschatological overdrive. Eschatology is the study of the last days or the last things. So when I say eschatological, that pertains to the end of the world. And so people like that become then, they go into this frenzy, thank you. It's like and I've done it once, twice, when I was younger. It's like a drug. Because you have this adrenaline rush, like, whoa! And so I'm very cautious about this. So for me to talk about this here to you, I'm saying this so that you understand that if your pastor, who has that kind of cautious approach to these things, brings this to you on a Sabbath morning, then there has to be something important about it. Are you still with me? You still with me? Because the last thing, let me say that again, the last thing you want to be is one of those fruitcake nutwing Adventists and sit in this church. Because we'll have a really good time together. Because I ain't going nowhere. And I have encountered my dear brothers and sisters who are of that ilk. We love each other, and we hope to see each other in the sea of glass, but not before. And that's a mutual feeling. Anyway, never mind. So, for me to bring this to you, there has to be something important about it. Now, what is it? Well, we believe, as Seventh-day Adventists, that the big picture is not just about Jesus coming again, which it is. That's, of course, the center of the big picture. That is what we're waiting for. That's part of our name. That's why you are here today and in no other church tomorrow, because you are Adventists. Adventists, from the Latin advent, coming. We believe in the coming of Jesus. Very strongly. That's part of our heritage. That's who we are. That's what we came out of. The movement in the 1840s that Jesus is coming again. And of course, we're Seventh-day Adventists. That's why we meet here today and not 24 hours later. Because of the Sabbath. But there is something in the Adventist understanding of the big picture that includes not just what happens at the very end when Jesus comes, but also what leads up to that event. Are you still with me? Something will happen in this world between now and when he comes again. And we go to Revelation 12 and 13 and 14, and we read some of these verses, and we study these prophecies, and we link it to the prophetic book of Daniel in the Old Testament, and we come to certain conclusions. And so for over 100-something years, Adventists have warned that at the end, just before Jesus comes, there's going to be a mass movement of people persecuting the true people of God. And this mass movement of people persecuting the true church of God, they may look very religious. Oh. See, because when we think of persecution, we think of communist soldiers in faraway countries who lock up pastors and their congregations and keep them rotting in jail. But not so with the picture of the very last events just before Jesus comes. It seems to be that is a very religious movement. And without going into all the details, and maybe we could do that another time, without going into all the details, we believe, through looking at what God has shown John in Revelation, that one of the big one of the big contributors to this massive movement, religio-political movement against the people of God, will be, unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church. That's our understanding. That's not to say that if you are a Roman Catholic, you are a bad person, and tomorrow you're going to turn into some loony, raving persecutor. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the system of Roman Catholicism, as it has developed over centuries, remember, this is a very old church. Okay, I'm talking to an American audience. Picture this: 1,000 years, not just 200 or 300. No, 1,000 years. And that is not even as old as the church is. It was founded in the 3rd and 4th century AD. That's 1,700 years ago. That's a long time ago. This church has been around for a long time. And over this long time, there developed certain characteristics that we look at and we find troubling. And why say we not just we Adventists, no, we Protestant Christians. We can't agree with that. We can't agree with the veneration of Mary. We can't agree with the idea that a human priest can forgive your sins. We can't agree with the idea that you have to go to a church to receive salvation and to be given grace through the Eucharist, through the it's the bread and the wine. Communion, thank you. Yeah, the Eucharist, the communion. We don't believe in that. We don't believe that the head of the church is the representative of Christ on earth. Because Jesus says that I send the representative. Yeah, he's called the Holy Spirit. That's my representative. We believe that if you want to have forgiveness of sin, you don't need to go to me or to Joe or to any human being. No, you fall on your knees, you confess your sin, and according to 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sin, God is faithful and just to forgive you your sin there and then. Let me give you, time out, 30-second ad break. Next week in Cherry Hill. No, when I come around next time, next 2 weeks we have communion, 3 weeks from now. So I won't be here for 3 weeks because of fifth Sabbath, and then first Sabbath in April we have communion. One of these days I'm going to preach on the state of the dead. We're still in the ad break, right? Still in the ad break. Why? Because when I watched the Oscars on ABC, there was this thing they call Resurrection. It's a series that started a couple of Sundays ago about dead people coming back to life and meeting their families again and freaking them out. I don't watch that stuff because that was a little too weird. Now, I watched Lost and stuff, but no, this one was a bit beyond what I... And so I thought, whoa, wait a second. Millions of people are going to watch this and going to believe a certain thing about what happens to a human being when they die. And guess what? As Adventists, we have a certain view on what happens to a human being when he dies or she dies. And it has nothing to do with flying off. No, we don't fly away, not until Jesus comes. Anyway, but that's for then. And so... now, I wish I had a DVR so I could just go back to where I left off, you know what I mean? So like just rewind a bit. What was the point I was making? Anyway, so that's for... So we don't agree with that. And yeah, so in the end of days... I'm sorry, I lost my thread here, and I'm trying to refine it. Where is it? At the end of time, there's going to be trouble. There you have the persecuted church, but then who's doing the persecution and who's being persecuted? Well, like I said, we have a good think about this, that this large old church that has developed certain characteristics throughout the centuries of its existence and hasn't changed those characteristics may exhibit those characteristics again at the very end of time. Okay, I lost you. Good. The same church that came up with the idea of Inquisition and persecuting those that dissent from its belief, i.e. European Roman Catholic Church in the year 1300. Those characteristics may still be in the system and may exhibit themselves again at the very end of time. Now, I know this makes no sense to some of us, and you think, Pastor, you completely lost your mind. I realize that, but 40 years ago, to think that the pontiff would ever address a Pentecostal pastoral convention was just as insane. So if that was then thought as impossible and happened 3 weeks ago, then who is to say, given the right circumstances, and I know a little bit about circumstances as human nature. We've looked at that last 2 weeks ago when I talked about German history. Given the right circumstances, human beings will do strange things. And I will not and I cannot discount the possibility. See, and now you see how careful I am with my expression on this. I will not discount the possibility that the same church that persecuted Protestants and others 500, 600, 700 years ago may not do the same, or may be part of a system that does the same just before Jesus comes. Still talking about the big picture, what we think happens before Jesus comes. And then we have this. We have Auntie Ellen, who says in Ellen White, for the rest of you. We have her saying something in volume 5 of the Testimonies and the Great Controversy, page 588, that I think is chapter 35. She talks about the deception that will happen before Jesus comes. She talks about, and this is what caught my attention when I watched the video on Amazing Facts. She talks about that when Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power. When she wrote this, volume 5 of Testimonies, that was what, 1880, 1890? It was even more insane to write this back then than if she had lived in my time 40, 30 years ago, and if she had written it then. It was inconceivable, and yet 3 weeks ago, we have seen not Protestantism, but a fairly influential Pentecostal pastor stretching his hand across the gulf and grasping the hand of the Roman power, and by that she means the Roman Catholic Church. So I'm beginning to think, whoa. And then in Great Controversy, she says something similar, where the Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to clasp hands with the Roman power. And I left out spiritualism because that's something that we might want to talk about next time when we talk about resurrection. So if she says that, and we believe that God has given her particular messages for his church, our church, in these days, and I see something like this happen before my eyes on YouTube, of course I have to mention that to us and bring to our attention. Why? Because we need to keep in mind the big picture. You see, sometimes we get so bogged down in the sand pits of life, like Hugh McGregor and his friend Charlie Broadman got bogged down in the sand pits of Mongolia. Sometimes we get so bogged down in those sand pits that we forget the big picture, where we are actually heading. And events like the Pope's greeting to the ministerial convention in Texas, or the invitation of John Boehner to the pontiff to address the House, the joint session of the Congress. Those are events that remind me that there's a big picture, there's a destination that we're heading to, and I cannot get bogged down too much and think that the here and now is the most important thing in the world, because I'm heading somewhere. So when your life is turning slightly sour and you think, I need to now, I need to now get down and dirty and get on with it. Well, yes, if you do this spiritually because you want to head towards Jesus, not I need to now see if I can, kill the competition so that I can get ahead. Because all of it that we have here, everything that we have, everything that we earn, everything that we have achieved is temporary. Everything, except one thing. The only thing that will not be destroyed when Jesus comes again, the only thing that will not be destroyed is your character. I'm touching my head because it's right here. Right here. That's that bit of gray matter under most of your hair, Joe, under your skin, under your hair. That's where the character is. That's the only thing we will take with us. Not my money, not my education, not my degrees, nothing, only my character. Now, of course, education is good because it builds character. Knowledge is good because it helps me and reminds me not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Remember that? And to deal with the past, to have a bit of Vergangenheitsbewältigung. How many of you remember that word? Because it builds character. It makes me both more empathetic to people who are still struggling, and it makes me more humble because I realize I'm not all that. because character is the only thing I can take with me. That's the big picture. And I need to be reminded by events like this that happen now around the world that who knows, maybe time is wrapping up much quicker than I thought at first. And I have to ask myself the question, am I still ready? Am I still heading in the right direction? Now we're coming to what Jesus had to say about the big picture. And that's will take us back to our memory verse. I'm not in Sabbath school anymore, to our scripture reading. Matthew 24. See, Matthew 24 is a part of a larger picture that Jesus painted to his disciples when he talked about the end of the world. And that's, of course, where we're heading. So that's 2 chapters that we really should have a look at, right? Some of you may know and some of you may not know. Let me just give you, see if I can do this in 30 seconds, the context of what happened in Matthew 24. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees in the temple, and they're having a lot of arguments there. That's the week before Jesus dies, so there's a lot of arguments going on. And at the end of the final argument with these Pharisees, with these religious leaders of the day, Jesus says something to them. Your house is going to be left unto you desolate. That's the end of Matthew 23. And he walks out. Now his disciples hear that. The disciples are Jews, and to a Jew, the temple is the pinnacle of their religion, of their world, of everything. The universe is sort of condensed in the temple building. And it was a fairly good building, fairly beautiful. I mean, if we stood in front of it now, then we would think, wow, that's a nice place. But of course, we have buildings far bigger and more grandiose than the Jewish temple. And so we probably would have been like, yeah, what? Is this it? Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? Bit small, isn't it? Oh, wonderful. You know how we are. And so now they ask, whoa. As they leave, Jesus says, I'm telling you, this whole thing is going to be destroyed. What? And so no wonder at the beginning of Matthew 24, they asked Jesus this question, when will this happen? And when will the end of the world be? Because to the Jewish disciples, that's the same thing. You destroy the temple, that means the world is coming to an end. That's it. End of the world. And so now Jesus, picking up on this, is wrapping his answer, which is Matthew 24 and 25, both chapters answer that question. He's wrapping it into these 2 layers of the destruction of the temple, which happened in year 70, and the end of the world. He's wrapping that into one big answer. This morning, who was here for Sabbath? Don't show your hands. Don't show your hands. In Sabbath school, we discussed something, and we ended with John 16. And in John 16, Jesus says to his disciples, I've got a lot more to tell you, but you can't take it right now. And I think this was one of those examples where Jesus had a lot more to tell the disciples, but they couldn't take it right now. So he has to sort of carefully wrap the 2 things together and carefully tell them, what will happen, how. And so, in other words, he mixes the 2 events together, and now we have to unfold these things and say, well, this was probably to do with the temple, and then this is to do with the end of the world, and maybe, and so when Jesus says, pray that your flight will not be on the Sabbath or in the winter, good counsel. If you ever have to escape somewhere, you don't want it to happen in the winter. New Jersey, do you agree with me? Yeah, definitely, right? But that was primarily spoken to the people in Jerusalem. When they saw Jerusalem surrounded by an army, when they saw the statue, the Roman thing going up there, there's a reference to Daniel somewhere in Matthew 24. There was a lot of reference to what happened in 70, but there's also reference to what happens to the end of the world, towards the end of the world. And I'm not going through this whole chapter verse by verse. There's war and pestilence and famine in diverse places, and the gospel will be preached, and when it's preached to all the world, then the end will come. And then Jesus says that we should not be deceived. That's one of his main points. He's telling them and us, don't be deceived, because there's a lot of people who claim to be me. Some claim to be Napoleon, and others claim to be Jesus. And Jesus is very clear. He says, don't believe them if they say that I'm here, out there, I'm in New Mexico in the desert, come and visit me. No, that's false. Or I'm here in a closed room on the 10th floor of the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan, New York. No, that's not Jesus either, because as the light flashes from the east to the west and everybody in between can see it, that's how the coming of the Son of Man will be in Matthew 24. Everybody will see it, not just a few chosen ones in the desert or somewhere in some room. So don't be deceived when somebody comes and says he is Jesus. No, he's not. If I don't see him, and you can, then he ain't Jesus. So we need to be prepared. And maybe events like the ones that I said at the beginning there, this video message and this coming together of the large Roman Catholic Church and other churches in Christendom, maybe that is something that can help us to remember that time is ticking, and am I prepared for what is lying ahead? And am I prepared to know the difference between truth and deception? Yeah. And then he says, and this is where our scripture reading was, in Matthew 24, starting verse 32, he says, look, you can tell that summer is coming by looking at the trees. So if the fig tree starts to blossom and sprout leaves and whatever he says, if things happening, then you know winter's over and summer is coming. Makes perfect sense, right? I mean, we look at our weather forecast. Where's my phone? We look at our weather forecast and we say, hey, it's getting warmer, so winter's over. No, not yet, isn't it? Because Monday's coming with snow. Every time I say that, man, there's something coming up. What's going on? I'm going to be here and have a good 4th of July and the snow will come. Now, we know that there are certain signs that we look at in the weather and in climate where we used to be able to be much more predictable, because the climate now seems to go all over the place. But that's the point Jesus is making. You can read the climate and what happens in nature, and you can say, oh, one season is coming to an end and the next season is going to start. And so in the same way, when you see stuff happening, be careful, because I'm coming soon. I'm paraphrasing now, Matthew 24, 32 to 36. But let me just make this also very plain before I finish with my second point, and then I'm done. And it won't take as long as the first point. He also says in verse 36, and that's why I had to put that in there, but of the day or the hour, nobody knows. Nobody knows, not even the angels know, only my Father knows. So, don't fall into the same ditch that I used to find myself in, decades ago. That sounds like really old. 20 years ago. Where we would see stuff like this happening, and the Pope was sneezing, and we were like, yeah, wow, it's going to happen now, and we're going to, maybe in 1991 he's going to come, maybe in 99, maybe 2000 he will be here. Maybe this will be the last president, maybe this will be the last Pope. And so we were calculating Jesus' coming, but Jesus says, no. I give you some points, I give you some pointers, I give you some general trends that you have to look out for, but don't calculate my coming, because you can't. Because if we do, then we look just as stupid as everybody else who tried. And that's now the butt of jokes of those who don't want to believe. And why should they? So if we as Adventists say, well, Jesus is coming soon, and then we put a date to it, or we put some kind of time frame to it, they will say, yeah, you're just as mad as that radio dude, right? And look what happened to him in 2012, remember that? May 2012? Yeah. I don't want us to be in that same category. So we need to keep that in mind very strongly. But at the same time, we have general pointers and general trends that are happening before our very eyes that should help us to wake up and smell the coffee, the Caro barley type coffee. and help us to realize that we're heading somewhere. But there's a second point that I learned from the long way round and from looking at Matthew 24 and 25. Ooh. You see, the destination, the journey has a destination, yes, but it at the same time also is a destination. What do you mean, Pastor? We can't just look at what happens in front of us or ahead of us. We can't just get all excited and now run around like headless chicken and throwing the great controversy and the Sunday law books at people, left, right, and center, and tell them to repent, because then we're no better than the guy who looks slightly disheveled with his sandwich board that the end is nigh, and you've seen him at the entrance to your subway, and you no longer pay any attention to it because you know that my friend needs attention. Now, we can't be in that category. There's a second point here. While they were driving, they stopped, they met people, they enjoyed the journey. And so, at the end of chapter 24, at the beginning, Jesus starts out, finishes chapter 24 by talking about a wise servant that knows when his master is coming back. But the point is not so much to just be ready for the master's return. The point that Jesus develops from then on in chapter 25 is, what did you do while you were waiting? Ooh. See, the big picture is not just about popes and Pentecostal and Protestant people reaching across the so-called Gulf and shaking hands, metaphorically speaking. It's not just about what Auntie wrote in volume 5 or in the Great Controversy. No, the big picture includes also the here and now of our journey. Why am I saying that? Because Jesus said it. Look at your neighbor, and if the eyes are closed, then give him a little nod and say, hey, wake up, because he's almost done. No, really, do it. I won't look. You see, beginning in verse 20, in chapter 25, he's talking about the 10 virgins, and they had to be ready. Okay, yeah, good, Pastor. Yeah, the midnight cry, and let's be ready for that. Yes, fine. But then, starting verse 14, Jesus is talking about the servants that were given talents of gold to prepare for the master's return. How? To use those talents while the master was traveling. So what am I doing? What are you doing with our lives in the here and now while we're waiting? Ewan McGregor and his friend Charlie did not just drive from John O'Groats to Cape Town in order to get from A to B. They wanted to enjoy the journey along the way, meet people, see sights. Do we rush through life because we think that we have to arrive at the destination? Don't worry, the destination will come. Oh, it will come. And that was my first point, that don't forget that, right? Don't forget the whole first half. No, but keep in mind, there's a balance, because we have a job to do here and now, and it is not just to talk about what will happen there and then. Why am I saying this? Because after the parable of the talents that reminds us that we need to be useful and use what God has given us here and now, Jesus finishes his little... what should we call it? It wasn't a sermon, but this, I can't remember the word now. Jesus finishes this by talking about sheep and goats. Good end time illustration, right? Those that are saved and those that are lost. Jesus comes and he separates humanity, those that will go to eternity and those that will be destroyed forever. And why am I saying this? Well, be here next time I preach about the resurrection, because that's part of that. But before there is this great divide, before there is this great separation between those that will be saved and those that live forever and those that won't, Jesus addresses those two groups. And he tells both groups why it is that they are in the group that they are in. And so he looks at those that are saved and he says, well, blessed are you because you gave me something to drink and you fed me and you clothed me and you did all this thing to me. And the group is looking at him. This is Matthew 25, the end of the chapter. And look at him and say, Lord, when did we do this? And Jesus says, as much as you've done it unto one of the least of brothers and sisters among you, you've done it unto me. And then he goes over to the side that will be lost and he says, y'all didn't treat me well because I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty, you didn't give me any drink. I was naked, you didn't give me any clothes. I was sick, you didn't visit me. I was in prison and you didn't come by. So sorry, guys. And then that group says, whoa, Lord, time out. When didn't we do this? And he repeats the same answer, only in the negative to that group. You didn't do this in the least, when you didn't treat the least of the brothers and sisters among you that way. And there is in the Desire of Ages, did I write it down? In the Desire of Ages, there is a is it Desire of Ages? I'm trying to find this because some of you are really interested in this. There is a quote. Okay, I can't find it now. Never mind. It's either Desire of Ages or Desire of Ages or the Christ Object Lessons, one of those two. And Sister White says that when humanity is there before Jesus, their final and eternal destiny will hinge on one point. And that was the scary thing for me to read. One point. And it wasn't of how well did we understand the destination, how well did we understand the coming deception and the implications of this in inter-church relationships and all these diverse prophecies and the whole zoology of Daniel and Revelation. That was not the point. The one point that Jesus is making in Matthew 25 and that Auntie Ellen is referring to when she talks about it, the one point is how we treated the poor and neglected. Yeah, I was just as quiet as the rest of you when I read that. And so the big picture is not just how much knowledge do I have about what is coming. That is important because that will save us and hopefully protect us from deception. Knowledge is good, right? But we have to have experience. We have to have compassion at the same time with those that are here around us, in the church and outside. That's the big picture. So when we get excited about Bina is inviting Pope Francis to address the Congress. Yeah, the end is nigh. Ken Copeland has sent a video message to the Vatican and is probably going to be invited to deliver it themselves. And then they're going to lay hands on each other and pray for each other in Italian and in other tongues. And the end is nigh. And if that's all we do, meanwhile, your neighbor don't know how to feed the kids or pay the rent. Meanwhile, your church brother or sister in this church feels the emotional, the financial, the whatever pain, and we don't care because we're so excited about the Pope. Then we have lost the plot of the big picture. Because not just does Jesus want us to have knowledge, he requires us to have compassion. But we need both. Because before he comes, who knows, the deception that the devil will throw at humanity may be so elaborate, so well made, that even we may be in danger of saying, whoa. Maybe that's the right way to go, you know what I mean? Knowledge is important. And we need to have moments like this, sermons like this, that remind us of that, so we can go back and study it. And who knows, if enough of you send me an email, then I might even preach about it some more. But knowledge by itself is not all important. Because if it's not mixed with the compassion that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 25, then we may be knowledgeable but find ourselves on the goat side. Then I may be a very knowledgeable goat. Because guess what? In Matthew 25, the knowledgeable goats went to destruction while the compassionate sheep went to eternal life. But in this day and age, we have to have both. So, let's see if I can wrap this up in one pithy sentence. Regardless of where we are in life right now, whether we are on the high crest, everything goes well, or whether we find ourselves down in the valley and things stink, we have a hope that burns within our hearts. Hope in the coming of the Lord. That's the big picture. And things like the Pope and stuff remind us of where we're heading. But while we're heading there, while we're riding our little bikes of life through life with all its sand pitfalls and its asphalted smooth roads, let's not forget that the same Lord that warned us and told us of what was lying ahead also requires from us something. What are we doing here and now? How do we use those talents that we have of knowing what we do, of having what we have? How do we multiply talents in the kingdom of God? Because we can't take any money with us. There's only two ways of multiplying things, and that is make yourself better through the Holy Spirit in you and get somebody else to have the same experience. So now there's two of us. That's how we multiply. So the big picture requires us to have both. To know, and to know more and better, and to be compassionate, and to do that more and better.